Welcome to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Foster, a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, and spiritual mentor, here to provide you with the next steps towards your dream reality, along with clarity and deep validation while on your spiritual journey. I have an immense passion for all things paranormal, spiritual, and of course, having some super fun chats with incredibly knowledgeable people. In each episode, we will expand our minds, ignite our inner psychics, embrace our spiritual awakening journeys, and live a super grounded, witchy life. I hope you learned something new in today's episode. Hello. Welcome to Divine Gossip. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. I have an amazing guest once again, Lena, with me. Lena works with her clients to illuminate their shadow side of self, society, and systems of oppression. She supports change makers in their mission to lead and liberate humanity. What a fucking intro. First of all, I forgot what I wrote, but then I just read it out loud. I was like, holy shit, your job is like exactly what we need. Lena, why don't you tell us more about what you do and who you are and all of that fun stuff?
Um, Thank you, Mackenzie. I'm really happy to be here with you. And this is such a big question, I feel like, because it's in this constant state of evolution. And so I'm just going to give a little bit of backstory, kind of how I got to this point. I Well, first of all, I studied sociology and psychology with the intention to become a therapist. But I had a lot of past historical traumas that really made me afraid to do that, to feel that I wouldn't be able to hold all of that. And I kind of deviated from that path and ended up getting a master's in cultural anthropology with a research specialization in religious-based war and conflict. And then I also simultaneously studied international development.
Wow.
And it got really into intercultural like education, intercultural training, leadership development, global citizenship. And I did all of like kind of a combination of all of that stuff for 10 to 15 years almost. And then was like, okay, I want to step away from this and start my own business. And that was really motivated by kind of seeing these patterns, um, where I was really feeling like the division between people is a reflection of the disconnection within them, the disconnect from their own soul, from source. Um, and so I kind of, when I started my business, first of all, I kind of had an existential identity crisis, and really questioned what I was doing and how I was going to do it. And then I just decided, like, well, I have to start something and I'm going to move in the direction I'm being led into and just experiment and see what happens. And so then I just like went so far on the side of really self-awareness, self-understanding, personal development, personal growth, the inner work, and all like so deep into it that now I'm like reading birth charts and looking at how, the energetic imprints from past lives influence our limiting beliefs and experiences in this life. And now I'm kind of revisiting my former lives that happened in this life. And I'm bringing all of my work together, and I'm actually creating a methodology called revolutionary change. And there's all these like different models and frameworks and all this stuff associated with it, to really understand how our world, and especially the systems we live under, are a projection of this inner disconnect, and an inability to sort of look at and sit with and process pain and trauma, and how that leads to othering and division and divides between individuals and groups. And yeah, so I'm like developing this methodology and framework of like how do we actually lead ourselves and others in a way that liberates liberates us individually and collectively. So yeah, that's like a very basic summary.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's honestly no words to express how important that work is because I mean, when you're talking, I just think of like our own perception. Like our perception shapes reality. And if how we perceive ourselves is how we perceive other people, that's so, your self perception is so important. Your energy, your belief system, everything about you and personal work is so important because you're so right. It shapes the division within ourselves, just like you said, shapes the division between other people and societies, and that is so prevalent in today's world. I mean, we could think of 40 million of examples of oppression, racism, systemic oppression that is built into our system, and we live with that every single day. um so holy shit, that's so important, and I love what you do. It's so cool, and the fact that you can put it into words is very admirable. um can Sorry, my cat, oh my god, do you hear him?
Yeah, yeah. He
Okay.
wants a little pet.
Yeah, no kidding. Jesus. Okay. He just is gonna yell at me this whole time, but that's fine. It's ambiance, which it's the witch life. But what I actually want to talk about that just like a little more before we get into the questions I wrote down. Like when I thought of like your perception shapes your reality, can you talk about the role of perception and what you do? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and this is a huge part of understanding like differences across cultures because our context literally shapes our brain.
Yeah.
Um, there, according to the cultural context you're raised in and the values of that culture, there may be certain things when you move into a different cultural context that your brain literally doesn't have the capacity to perceive in the way that it is perceived by the people in that context. And so we really do live like in a reality of our own creation, both individually and collectively. And so, right, that's really kind of the source of conflict most often is that our perceptions don't line up with one another. Like I perceive something in a completely different way than you perceive something. Um, and that's why, and our perception is really based on our lived experience, right? And the things that move us, that matter to us, that have hurt us, that have created pain for us. And so we really see the world through this lens of just like a very unique, like
Yeah.
it's just a combination of all of the things that make us a unique individual. um and so that can really like clash with
Yeah.
somebody else's understanding or perception of the world or reality or circumstances.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was um I always hesitate to get personal on here, but like what the fuck ever. I just I when I moved out of my parents' house, it was a decision solely based on me and how I felt, and that was the first time I've ever done that. Like made a decision based on how I felt, and they perceived they perceived it as, sorry, I had like something in my throat. That's gross. Shouldn't have shared that, but they perceived it
Well,
as,
when you speak your truth, it's coming out.
yeah, exactly. They perceived it as like wrong. They perceived it as like, they didn't say this, of course, but they didn't think it was a smart decision. And I perceived it as, well, I'm basing it off of my own emotions. I'm basing it off of like how I feel. Anyway, that is the root of like probably every argument, right? Is you perceive something and believe it as truth, and so does the other person. And that is very scary sometimes because when you don't know who you are and you're having, you're wobbling in your truth and you don't know what your truth is and who you really are and what your personality is, what your values are, other people's perceptions can kind of leak into your own. And then you don't know what's true and what's real. And that's like, I'm I mean, I hate to say this because I hate when people say it to me, but I'm very young. I'm 19, so I'm still shaping who I am, you know? But
We
that
all are.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I love that. But yeah, like perception was such a huge deal for me because I was like, because I'm such an empathetic person too, like especially a lot of spiritual people are, you know, obviously. But when you're an empathetic person, you're able to see both sides. And when you're able to see both sides, it's like, what the fuck is real? What's the truth? What's good? What's bad? And it all comes down to you and who you are and all of that. I don't know if that made sense, but that's why what your work resonates with me. That's why your work resonates with me, is because your self-perception, you know, reflects into your outer world and creates everything. And that's a huge fucking deal. So it was just a huge theme in my life recently. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Of course. Okay, let's get into questions. So can you explain, you do trauma alchemy. Can you explain what that is for people who don't know? And then we'll get into like the shadow work part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think they're very interrelated. So I see trauma alchemy as really this process of transmuting and transforming the impacts of trauma. So taking something that may have caused us pain or hurt or suffering, and maybe still, because right, like we continue to be impacted by traumatic experiences. They really shape our beliefs and our behaviors and our patterns. And it's really kind of transforming that pain into some kind of power or some sort of sense of purpose, or wanting to create a different experience for someone else. I really like, and all the things that we have to kind of confront within ourselves in order to be able to do that. And I see shadow work as like the process by which trauma alchemy happens. So shadow work is really um our shadow are these repressed or suppressed parts of self, usually rooted in shame, not always, but somehow somewhere we receive a message that like we shouldn't feel this way, or we shouldn't think this, or we shouldn't do this. And so all of these parts of ourselves that don't feel congruent with external expectations, we push them into our shadow. And sometimes they really are, maybe qualities that reflect judgment, like maybe things that we judge in other people, but they're also very often like our gifts and our strengths and things that other people maybe were triggered by and shamed us for, and then we were like, oh, like can't let anybody see this part of me. And so the shadow becomes really this like, it's very unconscious. A lot of times we don't even realize that we've done this. It's like not even part of our awareness. And so shadow work is really like, okay, let's identify, first of all, what are these parts of self that have been suppressed? Let's learn how to love them and reclaim them and understand that they were cast into the shadow for a reason. And that reason was meant to keep us safe in some way, to protect us from something. Um, but over time, it's like it's not actually serving us anymore. This kind of self-protection actually becomes a limitation. And so we learn to accept and love and embrace those parts of us, and then integrate them into the wholeness of who we are. Like I said, reclaiming them and understanding like, what does it mean for me to embody this quality or this energy or this characteristic in my way, in the way that reflects my truth, in the way that is aligned for me. And like not assuming that it has to be the way other people say it is. So like, for example, anger is just like one that shows up so much that we really feel, especially when we identify ourselves as like quote unquote good people. It's like, I shouldn't be angry. Like anger is bad, and anger hurts people, and that's because most of us see anger modeled in this really destructive, explosive way. And so we reject anger, and then we don't allow ourselves to feel or experience anger. But very often anger is like justified, especially when we're hurt, right? And so but when we suppress that, it actually like kind of comes out sideways and actually looks like the kind of anger we're trying to avoid. But if we want to experience and express anger in a healthy way, we have to be willing to feel it and to look at it and to know that it doesn't have to look explosive and destructive. And so it's just like reorienting, right? Shifting our perception around how we think about these parts of self that have been repressed, so that we really can operate from our wholeness and not be like fragmented and split off and like have our energy scattered all over everywhere and all these different people, to just be complete with ourselves. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love your process, like you call the process shadow work, like the how shadow work, because when I first started, I have so many questions. When I first started, when I first started my spiritual journey, like I had my awakening and I was like, holy shit, I love all of this. That it was because of TikTok, which is so fucking Gen Z, but I downloaded an app and I saw people reading tarot and like I was like, oh my God, so cool. Anyway, TikTok was like blowing up in 2020 and everyone was talking about shadow work and they still are on TikTok. But normally I see shadow work. I used to see shadow work as just like journaling and like journaling childhood prompts. And like I always saw it as like I know I had a rough childhood emotionally, as a lot of us have. And how the fuck am I supposed to get down to the bottom of it by answering a question in my journal? Like, how am I supposed to move this out of my body and like alchemize it and all of this, So I just love how actually like the respect you're giving shadow work, because it's not just like a journal prompt. Like sometimes, yeah, I guess it can be, but a lot of the times it's alchemizing trauma, and that's really big deal. So I love that. When you say like breaking down, not breaking down, but like alchemizing like limiting beliefs that we've taken on because of things that we're told. I feel like a lot of us have a lot of limiting beliefs, right? I don't think there's one person that doesn't have one. I'm so logical about it because I'm always like, okay, if I get rid of this one, then I'll just move on to the next one, and then I'll get rid of that one, and then like I just like keep going. What is your opinion on like having a day or a time in your journey where you're 100% healed? I'm a firm believer that's never going to happen, unfortunately. But just what's your perspective on that? Because when I think about it, I'm like breaking down these unhealthy patterns and beliefs and habits. Like, is there ever going to be a day where I don't have to break anything down or like heal anything,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you that it's like really never going to happen, that it's a lifelong journey. And I really think it's the reason we're here. Like, the reason we're here is to learn how to break free of all of these things. And, if we were such masters at it, like we wouldn't reincarnate. And this kind of ties to I think something we'll touch on later with spiritual bypassing, but it's like one thing for me is kind of like it's interesting that some people like spend their whole lives like trying to transcend earth. It's like, well, I mean, but your soul like came here for a reason, like, if you were just going to transcend, there's no reason to even be here. But yeah, I just think that these things are so deeply ingrained. They become so deeply ingrained within us. I mean, if we're just kind of, starting to quote unquote wake up to these things when we're 20, 25, 30, I mean, that's like a long chunk of time that those patterns or beliefs have been spent like ingraining themselves into us, right? And so the unlearning process, I think, is one that takes time, and there are lots of layers to it. So we might, understand a layer of a limiting belief or what leads to it, and we kind of work through that. But then we'll see, like 5 years down the road, we revisit that and understand, oh, there's another layer here that I wasn't aware of. And so it's really like this, like this kind of cyclical circular process of revisiting lessons and challenges with from a new perspective, a new perception, a new version of self. And so we're always you know alchemizing maybe in a new way, or like from a different angle, but it's this really like continuous process.
That's so,
um
yeah, that's so true. I was just gonna say, like, we're always becoming a new person. We're always having new experiences. So like we're gonna have to take what we learned and embrace it in new experiences, which can bring up more. So this sounds
right.
exhausting, but it's very fun.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I think is like really useful maybe to keep in mind is that everything is connected. It's all interconnected, it's all interrelated. I think the way we relate to one thing, it really is a reflection of how we relate to everything. So when we start to, sort of break down or unravel one limiting belief, it is going to have a ripple effect on other areas of our life too. So it's not like, oh, I have this huge list of things I have to work through, but it's like if I focus on this one thing that I'm aware of, it's automatically going to create some kind of release or resolve in other areas as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this is what you work through with clients.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's so impressive. That's so impressive. Okay. Well, what does that look like? I'm just being nosy now, I guess, but how do you take people through this? Is it talk therapy? Is it energetic work? Like, how do you like hold them through this?
Yeah. Um, mm, I mean, there's different layers. I like to, that I like to use astrology as a tool.
Oh yeah, I love that part of you.
So that's one thing that I do, is to bring some awareness to unconscious patterns of behavior and unconscious beliefs that people might have. So there are lots of different ways to approach astrology, lots of different sort of specializations or areas of focus. I have most extensively studied evolutionary astrology, and so that's how I read a chart. And that really looks at the journey of the soul across lifetimes and the development of the soul. So it presumes that we do reincarnate, and that the purpose of our reincarnations is to like learn lessons that we decided we were going to learn before we even reincarnated. And so we also kind of like orchestrated certain challenges that would support us in learning those lessons. And so what we see is that there are these like themes or patterns that play out again and again over the course of our lifetimes, and that kind of energetic imprint might take a different flavor, let's say, in our current life than it did in the past life, but the theme that it's trying to get like to show us is often very similar or related. um but it's often like unconscious. And so a lot of the things that we're learning to break free of in order to like personally liberate ourselves, um a lot of those things play out in our early childhood experiences, right? And we're really like conditioned and programmed almost to have like the very exact beliefs and behaviors we came here to break free of. Because again, there like would be no purpose for us to be here if we weren't like playing in this little matrix game. But
That's true, yeah.
yeah, so what happens when we look at the chart like through this lens is we can really identify kind of, yeah, these energetic imprints that are being brought over from past life experiences that are now really a part of a person's unconscious. Like they're just like ingrained, and they're playing out in ways that people might not realize. And so we kind of look at like, what are these things? How did they sort of crop up in the early childhood experience, but how are they also a reflection of past life lessons, or places where we got a little bit stuck, or we maybe like missed the lessons. We can even see that in the chart. Like they're called like skip steps. Like this is something
Wow.
my soul tried to learn before and I didn't quite get there, and so now I'm like really feeling it in this life. And so I use that. I Mackenzie, I also use journaling prompts, but
Okay,
what's
but I know they're not like some dinky, like, remember the first time you felt sad? Like they're actual, like, good. They're good.
yeah, well, and I especially love to use them for identifying the unconscious beliefs and behaviors, because it's so interesting, especially with this like set of questions that I ask. There's like 8 or 9 questions that I kind of always ask people at the beginning of like a shadow work process. And and they'll give me the answers, and this is like one of the reasons I think it can be useful to have like an outside perspective, because we're so like close to the thing, we can't see the thing. So people will answer these prompts, and to me it's like very obvious what are the themes that are playing out and the patterns. And I'll ask them like, well, what themes or patterns do you see in these responses? And people can usually identify a few, but the thing that feels like the most significant, they don't see it. And again, it's because, right, it's part of the shadow. It's like there's some reason I don't want to see that. So it's like my brain just cuts off my ability to even see it. And so that's really useful in the beginning to really understand like what are the things a person's not even able to see, right? Because that is typically the thing we need to focus on in our work together. And then there's stuff like I do like inner child work, and there's visualizations, and I always kind of give people like different practices, things to try, maybe rituals. I mean, it's really dependent on every person's, you know, unique needs and the things that they're facing. But a lot of it is yeah, a lot of it is kind of mental and verbal processing. I do lean on my intuition a lot with things like but my psychic gifts have not fully come through. I've been told like multiple times that that will happen in my 40s. I don't know. Let's see. But I do think I have some kind of like block, and well, I mean, I have past life traumas around it, so it's probably connected to some of that. But yeah, and then I really would love to study and learn a lot more about somatics. I use a little bit of that, but I really think that that's going to become more and more important, like understanding how we're storing this stuff in the cells of our body, um, and moving it out that way. So it's like a mix of different things.
Yeah, no, I loved all of that. That all of those tools make a lot of sense. And I had no idea about evolutionary astrology. That is really cool. I mean, because I know astrology well, but I didn't know it could go that deep. A lot of people don't
Mhm.
know it could go that deep, which I'm sure you've experienced. So I love all of that. I guess let's get into like spiritual bypassing because that's huge, especially nowadays. Because I
Yeah.
posted this reel, and it was like I actually forgot what I said in it, but it was definitely the message of love and light only will not serve you. And I used to be in the beginning of my spiritual journey, I used to even have friends that would be like, oh, only love and light. And I'd be like, oh my God, stop fucking saying that. Like I hate that term. And like it's fine, I feel like, to use that term as long as you understand like life is not all love and light. But that term has definitely been used to spiritual bypass shadow, dark, whatever you want to call it. So, can you explain to us what spiritual bypassing is and how can we avoid that on our spiritual journeys?
Um, yeah, I think it's just really this desire to I mean, the word that I want to use is like pretend. This desire to like pretend that certain things aren't happening. And I understand it in a sense. Like I understand why people gravitate to this kind of way of orienting to the world, because I do think there is a lot of validity in the idea that, you know, energy is a currency, what you pay attention to like grows, like this kind of idea that we like feed an idea or a situation by giving it attention. um I think there is some validity in that, but the way that that is used to like, well, let's just focus on the good because that's what we want to grow. And then it's like, does that mean that the other stuff doesn't exist? And it's kind of like, I mean, it's very interesting that this happens in a spiritual context, because even like, let's say the idea of gods or spirit or source, right? So like if I, you know, if I don't believe in that, does that mean it's not real? Um, I mean, yeah, just because we don't give attention to something doesn't negate the consequences of that thing. Um, right. So, I mean, it's a big thing with when there's tragedy in the world, like, yeah, like, why would I pay attention to that and feed energy into that and give
Oh
that?
my God, I hate that shit. Like with
We're
the
just we're just going to create more of it and blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, and what are you doing to like actually like for that not to happen, right? Like it
yes.
doesn't, ignoring it doesn't make it go away. I think it's like, it's how are we giving our energy to that thing? So if I, you know, if I respond to a horrific world event by like, oh well, like fuck those people who are hurting those people, and I'm like, you know, and people are evil, and how, I mean, if I'm feeding it, right, this like energy of divisiveness and division, well then yeah, like I'm contributing to more divisiveness and division. But if I'm like, okay, well, what role do I play in this? Like, how can I do something, and not everything and not all the things, right? Because we can't, but what can I do to contribute to the love and light, but not by ignoring, not ignoring the bad thing that's happening, but how am I channeling my energy in a useful, supportive, healing kind of way? You know, how like the work that I'm doing, right? Like the purpose or intention of that is to eliminate some of the barriers and divisions between people. And so the way that I approach that is really through a lens of empathy and compassion and forgiveness and understanding. And, you know, maybe that is like love and light, but I'm channeling it toward the darkness. Like, if I pretend the darkness doesn't exist, my love and light will never touch it. You know what I mean? It's like we have to be able to look at the things that lead to pain if we actually want to eliminate pain. Like we have to look at the root causes of things. So it doesn't make sense to me to be like, oh yeah, but if I just pretend it's not there, then it won't be there. I don't know. I mean, I don't even think I really answered your question, but
No, you 1000% did. A thousand
okay.
percent did. Spiritual bypassing is grazing over the negativity and using spirituality and like the positivity, you know, whatever, to ignore what actually needs to be looked at. Because if you are spiritual, you are empathetic, you understand the interconnectedness between all things. So why would you want something horrible to happen? That's what I look at it as, you know, just an aspect of spirituality. But that I literally fucking everything with Gaza going on right now. There are literally people in my life right now that are like, well, I don't look at the news because like I don't want that negativity in my life. I'm like, do you hear yourself? Like imagine what these people are going through this and you're like, I don't want that negativity in my life. Well, what a privileged fucking thing to say.
Right. Right. And there is, I mean, there is some, I think, like maybe limits to how much of it we consume, because I at one point I literally got physically sick from it because I was so like worried and anxious, and that's also not going to support me in like doing my part, right? So it's like there has to be some kind of balance where I don't allow myself to be consumed by it, and I'm not like feeding into this feeling of desperation, hopelessness, and powerlessness, because I think that can really happen when we're like really
And
seeing
yeah,
the things we're seeing. Um, but also, who does it serve for me to be like, oh yeah, like it makes me sad, so I don't want to see it. It's like, well, what the fuck? And so if it was happening here and the whole rest of the world was like, well, that makes me sad to see you be killed, so I'm just going to
ignore
look
it.
away. I mean, yeah, like we're here to liberate ourselves and each other. Like that means that we don't, yeah, that we don't pretend these
Yeah,
things are happening in the world. And they always have been, right? Like this is not, honestly, this is not a unique situation. It's unique in the sense that it's the first time we're really seeing so much of it, because of social media and people's phones, and we're being exposed to death and tragedy in a way that we haven't really looked at it before. But this is not new or unusual by any means, which is, I mean, yeah, it's just a product of the colonial state, and that the effects of that are happening everywhere, you know. Mhm.
absolutely. And you're so right. There's definitely a balance. I mean, saying, "Oh, let's just keep it all love and light here," like it's just like, okay, well, exactly. You wouldn't be saying that if it was happening to you. So there's empathy to be had. But I definitely don't think we're meant to see every single little thing that is happening for the sake of our mental health. There's action steps you can take to, you know, help tragedy, to uplift people who are being killed, literally. And there's also ways to protect yourself from the physical illness you can get from consuming too much of that. So I'm glad you said that because I don't know, it's so wild how prevalent that spiritual bypassing shit is today. um and I don't know, I personally just wouldn't, I don't want to associate myself with people who do that. That's why I speak a lot about it, because I'm just like, I am not that way. But I want to talk about really quick the law of attraction and your like opinion on that, because you were saying earlier like there is some truth to like energy being a currency, like what you focus on comes to you. And I believe that too. And here's my opinion on it, and you can tell me if you agree. I think that with the law of attraction, it's true. However, we still live in a human world, so there are exceptions, because I had a woman on, a family friend of mine on it, a Reiki healer, and she was like, anything bad that, and this episode is not out, so you don't know who she is, listeners, okay? But she was like, anything bad that has happened in your life, you attracted. And I literally said, so if someone in my family got murdered, I attracted that situation. And she goes, yes. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is not going to be released. I don't like that. So what is your opinion? What is your opinion on that, like, balance? Because I think there's a balance. You know what I mean by that? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hmm. So what first came to mind when you started asking me was actually whatever you posted today, um about kind of like you receive what you're ready for in a sense, or
Yes.
um
At the end of that, I was like, this, what did I say? I'm going to read it. I said, disclaimer, when I say obstacle, I mean the ones listed above as personal examples like breakups, friendship breakups, shitty people, financial issues. Select horrible situations are not because you're ready for them. Just as much as we're spiritual, we're humans living on earth and shit happens. Not everything has a woo woo reason. You know, you agree with that?
yeah, I mean, I think it's like the complexity and the nuance and all the layers of like being human. It's like there is an element, I think, of you know, energetics, and if I'm let's use money as an example, because law of attraction is often it applied to this, right? So um if I am relating to money in the same way that I might relate to a partner, which is like I'm anxiously avoidant and I'm graspy and clingy, but then I'm like, well, I need to like control the flow of my money, and when it comes in I have to like hold on to it, and but then I go into these like stages of just like, oh, and what, who the fuck cares? I'm just like very careless with it, and I'm throwing my money around, and I'm just kind of in this like really flip-flop energy, right? um then like, why would I expect money to be consistent with me if I'm not consistent with it, and if I'm not like a steward of what I've been given, and if I'm not disciplined in some way, if I'm not um yeah, if I'm not honoring it, um then why would I expect it to just like do whatever I want? It's kind of like really the same way like a partner would be, who would be like, well, what the fuck? Like, you're super inconsistent, and one day you're like loving on me and giving me all the praise and affection, and the next day you're like off in the woods and you're not talking to me. And right, there's just like this back and forth kind of whatever. And so I think there's like an energetic match that's happening, right? So like there is some aspect of like our this energetic kind of frequency, but then there's also just like shit happens, and other people, um especially like, let's say this example of murder, like how are you responsible for somebody else's choice around what they did with their projected pain and their inability to see like what that is rooted in? And um that's not like your fault. There's yeah, I mean, I think there is like always this kind of like balance, as you said before. There's not like I don't know, some set rule around how things happen. Like, I think there definitely are situations that we draw to us because we're supposed to learn from them, but it's not like every awful thing that happens to me, it's like I made it happen or it's my fault. Like, I want to give an example of something I found out recently. So I have always moved through life feeling very rejected and very unwanted, um and I've dealt a lot with um seasons of deep depression and suicidal ideation. I just get this feeling like I'm not supposed to be here, like I shouldn't be here, and it would be better if I were dead. Like, I have these kinds of thoughts, and my partner went to a seer shaman lady recently. We live here in Mexico, and he kind of follows the Toltec lineage. I don't know if you're familiar with the Toltecs, but um anyways, he went to see the seer, and she asked him about our relationship, and he he was just sharing with her, and he shared with her that one of the hardest things for him has been this feeling I have of like rejection, that he can see it in very subtle ways in different contexts, that I'm always like feeling rejected. Even if I'm not, like making a big deal about it, like he can see that coming through. So this seer, she's like, okay, like first of all, I see like a lot of stuff coming through about your girlfriend. And one of them is connected to her birth, or really like what she was kind of absorbing in the womb space. And so she said that this feeling of unwantedness and rejection comes from when I was in the womb. There is a layer of that is connected to my mom, but not that she didn't want me. It was more that she was in a very dangerous situation. I mean, she had just moved from Greece to the US. She didn't speak English. She didn't have community support, family. My dad turned out to be like a raging alcoholic and a drug addict and abusive in every way. And she was living in a literal hell. And she was afraid, right? And she was like overwhelmed. And how am I supposed to bring a kid into this? How am I supposed to take care of this kid? Blah, 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 blah. So I absorbed from that some feeling of being unwanted or rejected. And I actually did like a healing session like 12 years ago where I regressed to the womb space and I saw this and I felt this. So I knew that like felt true for me. Then the seer said that there's another layer to this, and that is that there's a feminine energy on the dad's side. I immediately knew this was my grandmother. This feminine energy on the dad's side who didn't want me to be born because I would take away the attention of my dad, because I would be and there's like a whole history of like weird things between my mom and my grandmother and my dad and that dynamic. But basically the seer said that this woman, who I really have no doubts is my grandmother, was doing witchcraft for me to die before I was born. So I also like carry this feeling of rejection, and like it would be better if I wasn't alive, like from this thing. And I have had tons of people in my life die from, I mean, I think my first best friend died when I was 6, and this has like happened repeatedly, like significant people, and people dying literally in front of me, and multiple people having died by suicide. And so the seer said this is like this energetic imprint that she has of rejection that she's been carrying from at such a young age. It magnetizes people who have the same inner experience, the same hopelessness, the same feeling of like, I shouldn't be here, or it would be better if I was dead, like this, that we're like energetically connected to each other. But that's not my fault, right? It's not my like somebody basically cursed me. And so I have this experience where a lot of people I care about pass away, and it's not my fault. You know what I'm saying? Like there are always so many different factors at play that we're not always aware of. And it's just like,
Yeah.
you know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I I think, I mean, that's literally not your fault. You were in the womb. You didn't even have a consciousness yet, and someone was already like trying to not make you a thing in this world, you know? So, I mean, that literally just proves it. Like, that's not your fault. And um yeah, I agree. So there's a balance to everything. I think that it's ignorant to say that you attract every single little thing that you bring into this world. Um okay, I'm gonna move on. Can you share with us how you define the concept of our shadow side? Um, in the three things that you list out in your title. So in individuals, in society, in systems of oppression. And why is it crucial to bring it to light? Which I think we kind of touched on a little bit, but what is that?
Um, Again, so it's all like interrelated and interconnected. I see the shadow in self very much as like the persona. So like the way that Carl Jung talks about the persona, it's like this constructed personality that we've basically pieced together based on the messages and expectations we've received from outside of us. And so the shadows and self are very often a reflection of, you know, the way our parents treated us, or the things that our parents said to us, or whatever they placed emphasis or importance on, from society, as like, here's what the media says about what I should look like, here's what my religion says about what it looks like to be good, here's what, you know, the government says about what it means to be like a good citizen. And so we're taking all this stuff, but then we're also influenced by these systems of oppression. So we live in a patriarchal world, a colonial world, right? A capitalistic world. And so again, we're like absorbing all these messages about where what we should place value on, and what is like good and bad and all of that. Like we're absorbing all of that from the outside, and we're constructing the self, to basically survive in the world. That's really, you know, what the shadow is meant to do, is to keep us safe in some way. So this self, this persona, a lot of it is shadow, because it's not the parts of us that are true. They're just the parts of us that, that we think are like who we're supposed to be. And so there's this process, right, of like detangling from that, and unlearning a lot of the stuff that we've internalized from outside of us. And so there's this process of removing the layers of programming and conditioning that come from our systems and from our sociocultural, um I don't know, indoctrination.
Yeah.
um yeah, and so there's like that element of like returning to ourselves, but then also understanding how society or culture or the systems of oppression are a reflection or a projection of the individual self, of the shadow, of the persona. Right, so I look at like, let's say colonialism, for example. I think it's a clear one in my mind. Of like, here are these people who said like, oh, let's go, you know, we're gonna set off and sail to the other side of the world, and we're like so excited, and we're doing something so big, and like, wow. And we get there, and we're like, oh shit, like look at these people, like so connected to nature, building fucking pyramids aligned with the stars. Like I think that they saw, that the colonial settlers saw in indigenous peoples all of these qualities and traits that they felt threatened by, that they felt wow, like wow, right? There's like, there was almost like an envy and being super impressed, but then like, oh well shit, like these people are powerful, right? And so there was immediately like this sense of fear and a need to control and a need to keep the self safe. And so what happens is like, well, yeah, if I don't want someone else to dominate me, not saying that that would have happened, but there was like a fear, right? That, because I think that this inadequacy was triggered. And
Mhm.
so there's this fear of like, well, if I don't control them, then they might dominate me, right? And
Yeah.
so then becomes this process of like, well, dehumanizing, because that's how you distance yourself from causing harm, is to, um right, is to like not even perceive the other as human. And so
Yeah.
we start using language like savage, right? Like you there's this, and again, I think a lot of this stuff happens unconsciously. It's like this projection, or this, um yeah, just this like fear-based way of keeping oneself safe. So you use language that dehumanizes so that it doesn't feel like you're actually doing something wrong, and that there's like some kind of justification for the actions that you're taking. And so I really feel like colonialism, this like widespread, let's control and exploit and oppress, was all rooted in inadequacy and fear, and right, and how that became projected into like a global movement that upholds the systems we live in today. So it's this, it's this like this process of looking how the self plays into society, into the systems, but also how the systems and society inform the creation of the self, right? So there's
Wow, that is so literally the way you talk is so cool. Like you are so intelligent. Literally every sentence you're saying is blowing my mind. You're like putting all of my feelings and thoughts into actual words that make sense. That is so. Do you think that when colonialism happened, that these people were obviously making it okay in their mind, but do you think some of them were also just psychopaths and didn't have that kind of mechanism? They were just like actual monsters. Do you think that's a thing, you know?
um I think very well there could have been people that yeah, that were just maybe like completely disassociated from like the
Yeah.
social kind of like connection of,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, it's like we're all humans, but for it to have been such a huge
That's true. Yeah.
widespread thing, I think that I think when we're talking about group context, that primarily like two of our trauma responses really come into play, and the first is um the fight response. So this very often is going to play out for people who, not always, okay, so like, but very often people who have externalized their pain. So people who, they really look, it's kind of like, let's blame everybody, like let's just like be mad at the whole world for this pain that I feel. And really, like, these people really become super disconnected from themselves, and the fight response, like, it wants to protect the self, but it wants to do that by through this almost like assertive, aggressive, like, let's dominate, let's control, because it's rooted in a feeling of lack of control and a feeling of helplessness and a feeling of powerlessness. So I have to like feel that some way outside of me, right? And like usually that's through other people. So you have certain people who are acting like out of a fight trauma response, but then like you have a lot of other people who are in the fawn response, and they're like, well, I have to stay safe, I have to maintain a sense of belonging, right? Like these are my people, and so of course it makes sense that like I'm going to side with my group, if, and even if that means that I'm against another group, right? So a lot of it is like this fawning that is meant to keep someone safe by really people pleasing and just like going along with what kind of like those who maybe are a little more dominant, like what they're doing, right? So again, we can see the example of the Holocaust, and we're like, well, like, why did so many people just follow along? And because they were fawning, they were trying to maintain their own sense of safety and belonging and security. And so like you can see that, right, how that like plays out on a more collective
Yeah,
level.
that makes sense. So, okay, that makes sense. That was a lot, but that made a lot of sense and that was helpful. Oh, what we got very deep very fast. So basically, the shadow self, the shadow side, is a version of yourself that you've put together to protect yourself based on external shit. You know what I mean? And then, but is there, okay, does that, is that that's interesting because I always thought the shadow side was just like your negative side, like your negative belief side, or like the side of me that gets like jealous. But like you don't get jealous without that external shit being put on you. Like you build that, you know what I mean? Like you don't have that negative stuff for no reason. It's not like you just made it up. It's because something taught you that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And again, like it's not always negative or dark or bad stuff, right? Like if I if I'm like love painting as a kid and I keep receiving the message from my parents like, you're never going to be able to do anything with that, you're not going to make money with that, that's just like a hobby, blah 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 blah. And then I'm like, painting, and then I start to internalize this belief, right? Like, painting is stupid, painting will never get me anywhere, painting doesn't, whatever. I tell all these stories, and so then I just stop painting. And then people are like, oh, like, are you an artist? I'm like, no.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
mean, it's a part of myself that I've suppressed or cast into the shadow because I feel like it doesn't, yeah, it like doesn't meet these external expectations.
So the shadow side is also stuff that is hidden.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. That's why it's called the shadow side. Look at that.
Yeah.
Do you have time? I have one more question.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. We just went off topic a lot because my brain is insane, but I want to ask, what are some common challenges or resistance you encounter when working with clients and when they confront their shadow selves or you address societal and systemic shadows? Like what comes up, what resistance comes up with that, and how do you navigate that?
Hmm. Well, I would say like the whole process is like one big ball of resistance for the most part because um again there is a reason that parts of ourselves are part of our shadow because we're trying to keep ourselves safe, to protect ourselves from rejection or criticism or abandonment or whatever it might be. So the things we need to do for ourselves and in our lives to alchemize the shadow, they bring up a shit ton of resistance because it means going against the patterns that I developed that have kept me safe in some way, right? They've also limited me. So it's like, either way, life is going to be hard. It's just kind of like I choose which hard I want it to be. So I'm either operating in these limiting patterns and beliefs, or I'm facing my resistance and like trying to move toward what would support and serve me, but that feels super uncomfortable and super unfamiliar and super unsafe. And even if it's not unsafe at all, that's how I perceive it, right? And so the resistance is a huge part of like what comes up in the work I do with people, because we're really being drawn into the areas that we just like don't have practice in, right? Like our muscles are completely atrophied in that space, so then somebody's giving you a weight and you're like, oh, but I can't hold it. It's like, but
Yeah.
I don't know how. I don't know how to hold this, but it's just because you haven't like built that capacity or that muscle yet. And yeah, and this is the thing that like comes up with the chart too, with the astrology, is because like we're the way that the chart is set up as a circle, right? And it's divided into these different parts, and we have kind of like this these contrasts. So let's say like Cancer is opposing Capricorn, and so there is like this kind of common thread between these archetypes, but they're also opposing one another. They're very different in a lot of ways. And so when you have, like, for example, a south node in Cancer and a north node in Capricorn, well, the south node, it's the space you're used to operating in, right? Like for even lifetimes, it's the energy that's familiar to you. And when you have a north node in Capricorn, it means like in this life you're meant to move in that direction. But you're like, well, but that's so different. And
That's
it's
so
like, it's like it's not what you're used to, so it feels threatening. But so there is a lot of like resistance.
yeah.
But
My south node is in Scorpio and my north node is in, I'm working with Megan right now one on one, and she's doing
yeah.
um uh she is making these PDFs of like your numerology and your human design and your, so she was like telling me a little bit about it before she finished, and she was like, your south node is in Scorpio and your north node is in Taurus. And I was like, that makes so much sense because I think Taurus people are like, no offense, this is so rude of me to say, but I'm just being honest. I think they're so boring. And I've always thought like relax that like sensual Taurus and like that grounded energy is so boring because I'm used
Or-
to Scorpio, like death, rebirth, like
Yeah,
mediumship, like all that witchy shit, you know? So you're so right. And when I think about going into like that more Taurus energy, my body literally gets so uncomfortable.
yeah,
And every time I go to like face that limiting belief or that new way of living that ultimately serves my highest good, of course, I get very afraid. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm gonna die. Like I literally feel like I'm gonna die when I do that. So
yeah. I know. So my South node is also in Scorpio with my North node in Taurus. And mine are in like I'm an Aries rising, so my houses and signs line up. So
oh well.
only is my South node in Scorpio, it's in the eighth house, and then the North node in Taurus in
Wow.
the second house. So it's like double energy, right? And growing up, I was like super, I mean, just like really transient. I moved a lot until I was like in my mid 30s. I moved just like all over the world. I was constantly like in this state of change. And the opposite of that felt like, oh my God, roots and like having things. And like, I
Yes.
just, and there was, when at the time that I lived in Florida, I had to like furnish an apartment. And I literally like laid on the display bed in the furniture store and like had a panic attack because I was like, I have to buy shit. I have to buy stuff that's gonna like hold me here. And it's funny because like it's like you grow into your chart. So as you get older, you become a little bit more comfortable with like the things you're supposed to move toward.
That's so
And
true. That is so true.
yeah, and now I'm like, I don't want to move anymore. I just want to be in this one place. I want shit. I want my shit. I'm tired of using other people's pots and pans to cook and other, because I've been moving so much and I'm always in spaces that aren't mine. And now it's like the thing that caused like a panic attack for me 10, 15 years ago. Now I'm just like, yeah, that's what I want.
Wow, that is so crazy. I was just telling Megan this, like, because she reminds me of such Taurus energy, and I have no idea about her chart. I know she's a Leo, of course, because she's beautiful and amazing. But I was she was sharing with me this playlist. It's called Divine Feminine, and it's just like the most Taurus playlist ever, just like grounding music, just like feminine energy. And I was like, damn, I really love this. But like me a year ago would be like, this is so boring. This is like, I'm gonna fall asleep. But now I just play it like every day. And I moved out of my parents and I'm like making this at home. And literally, like, as like the weeks go by, I'm like becoming more Taurus. It's very, very interesting. And I was the same way. Like, my boyfriend moved into this apartment and he didn't have anything at first. He was literally sleeping on like the mattress on the floor because it was his first apartment. And I was like, he was like, this sucks because he has a Taurus moon, so he loves like just like the most grounded energy ever. Like he's my rock, you know. He just loves a good home and a good nap and all of that. And I thought it was so fun that we got to like live on a mattress and like whatever. And he was like, this sucks. And I was like, this is so fun. We get to like and everyone thinks I'm like crazy because I just like thrive in that like transition phase. I don't know. So anyway, that is very, very true.
Yeah.
Well, what a great combo. I picked the fuck out of your brain. Thank you for cooperating with me and sharing so much knowledge.
Thank you so much. I really had fun.
Okay, good. Yay, I love that. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Please rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. And Lena, can you please share where people can work with you and anything else you would like to share?
Yeah. Well, wait, is this coming out tomorrow?
It is. It is. It is.
Okay, well, first of all, let me just say that for this week until Sunday, I have a discount on like my main kind of shadow work offering that combines shadow work with the soul purpose astrology. Shadow and Soul is the name of it. And it's like $300 off until Sunday, March 24th, if anyone is interested in that. And then otherwise, like the best place to connect with me is on Instagram. And I'm sure you'll probably like include the handle there somewhere, but it's just my name, Lena_Papadopoulos. So yeah.
Yay, cool. Thank you so much for giving us all of your knowledge on what you know best and explaining to me all the things and answering my interesting questions.
I loved it. Thank you.
Of course. All right, bye guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. Head to themackenziecollective.com to work with me further. If you have any questions or have any topics you want me to cover or any guests you want me to have on, please email all of that to info@themackenziecollective.com or go to the episode description to fill out my Google form. I love you. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.